And what I'm going to do here is to tell you a little bit what we did so far with this marine case study that was already mentioned by Stefan, and also, invite you, if anyone is interested, to really come to our workshop. It will be Wednesday afternoon and Thursday morning. Okay, so as Stefan mentioned, the marine case study was selected to really represent a question that was identified mainly by the scientific community, but we also think has a policy relevance. And so we had actually broader and two related questions, but of course, because of time constraints and resource constraints we heard about, we started with just one question that was, what are the relevant trends in kelp forests in Europe, and what is the evidence that these trends will affect ecosystem biodiversity and the provision of ecosystem services? Okay, so this was still quite broad. So why do we think this is relevant? I don't know if everyone here is familiar with kelp forests, but these kelps, these are, if you go, the definition of kelp can be very restrictive, and then you have relatively few species of algae that are like these that you see here, these brown kelps that I think everyone know, I hope. But you can also have a little broader definition and also include other algae. And they are very important because, well, they are like, we call it kelp forest because this kelp acts like the trees. They provides food, shelter, habitat for many, many, many other species. So these are very, very productive and biodiverse ecosystems. And besides that, these kelp forests also provide other services like coastal protection, carbon sequestration, of course. They help to keep water quality because they absorb a lot of nutrients and other pollutants. And also they are themselves used for different things. So they are harvested in some countries for fertilizer, for alginates, for many products. The interesting thing also is that a lot of this biomass is actually not used in the kelp forest itself, but it's exported to other ecosystems like deep sea ecosystems where there is very little organic matter, and this is very important. We start to have some studies to see the impact of if this changes, if we have less kelp, what will be the impact in the deep sea ecosystems. Also for the beach ecosystems. At the beach, usually this is not very much appreciated because this is, especially beaches that are heavily touristic. We don't like to see all these seaweeds with flies and all these other organisms that are part of this ecosystem that they are not always very liked. But anyway, these kelps are not only important within this ecosystem, but also for other ecosystems. Okay, well, this is just a quote from Darwin that was really marveled. Although we have a lot of kelp forests in Europe, he really, when he saw these giant kelps that exist in California, they're very famous with the seawaters and all these things. And also in Chile and other places, unfortunately not in Europe, these kinds. But also what happens is that we have seen cases of deforestation of large areas of kelp forest disappearing very rapidly. And you see here, this was a review done about 10 years ago, and there is nothing in Europe, but we knew that in Europe this was happening too. So we'll look also and try to see how could we frame this in a way that would be interesting for policymakers. And of course, there is something they are very interested in, that's fisheries. And so the link with fisheries, because this is very important habitat for fish, also for commercial fishes. And so this is very important. But for the conservation, we saw different links with the Habitats Directive, not There's no kelp forest really mentioned that, but at the reefs, and of course this is a very important reef ecosystem, but also with the marine strategy and the Water Framework Directive. So scooping, sorry. So we, although this question was started with the scientific community, we then really started dialogue with the policymakers. And my colleagues are smiling because one of the first policymakers I contacted actually did not know what a kelp forest was. And this was not very encouraging. But actually he was very interested after I explained what this was. But actually this was in one end of the scope. The other end was really in some countries there is very active management of kelp forests. There are monitoring programs, there are management programs, and so on, mainly because the kelp is used and harvested. So they know very well what this is, and I'll show you in a little bit. So there was a full range of interest from the policy side, going from the European side to actually many national policymakers and managers that we contacted. So we also then decide to use the NoK to select the experts to conduct the study, and we also sent lots of mails. We did not send 600, but we sent quite a number of mails to different organizations that have been identified by Estelle, and we got, let's say, a very small response in terms of hubs that responded, but we have very good response of a particular hub that of course was very specialized. I mean, it's a marine biodiversity hub this hub sent around our request. So we request experts on kelp forests to help with the study, and 69 experts were identified, and this was about in a month and a half. So we were quite happy. Actually, we received the first response in a few minutes, so it's very nice. From this, so what we did, we sent a questionnaire. So we did not just ask, are you interested to participate? When they said they were interested, we sent a questionnaire that actually was relatively simple, 2 pages, but asked questions about trends in kelp forests in Europe, so we restrict this to Europe, drivers of change, what they thought, effects of identified changes on ecosystem services, and then information on conservation and management programs that they knew of. We also asked if they were willing to give any further input to the study, and if they were interested in the results of the study, if they wanted to know more about it. And we had 52 questionnaires answered, quite well. But we include also, we ask about papers on the subject, and we ask the kind of question is your knowledge derived basically from papers, from your own work, from your institute work, and things like that. So we have a little bit of an idea where this knowledge is coming from. And we analyzed already this questionnaire, and we realized there is very different trends where depending where you look in Europe. So this is not one trend for all Europe. And then there is major gaps of knowledge on effects of kelps, even on fisheries. This is the main concern from the policy side, but and for other services. There is information. We already scooped a literature a little bit, so there is information, but actually this information is mainly outside Europe. In Europe, we have very little information, very little data and papers. So everyone identified biodiversity, that is the main characteristic of ecosystem, is changing when we change the density or the size of the kelp beds. And then in terms of drivers, there were many drivers that were identified, and they differ also different regions of Europe. Well, the interesting also result was all of them were interested to give more input, except one, and one is in my lab. So it's not a good sign. But that was the only one that replied that that was enough input for him. So we hope to keep most of these people really on board for the next phases. Well, another interesting result was that at least 3 countries really have active management plans for kelp forests. So they not only conservation, that some of these protected areas were set up because of kelp forests, but also management of activities, including, of course, kelp harvesting. So we will have this workshop, and what we intend to do is really to present and discuss the results of this scooping process, and also present and discuss the next steps for processing the knowledge. And so what we are going to propose is actually, and this was discussed here before with our colleagues in Work Package 3, was to try something that is quite challenging, to actually use the 3 different methods, but for each one have a piece of this question. So expert consultation we will use to assess what are the trends of kelp forests in Europe. We already saw that this is not a simple answer, and we'll work more on that, and we want really to have a review of what's happening in Europe only. Then we chose for a systematic review, going to propose to tackle what is the impact of changes in kelp forest density or area, already kind of defining what we want, on fisheries and biodiversity. And these are ready to tackle something that is very much of interest for the policymakers, and something that we know, we have data available. And probably for this exercise, we use data and knowledge from all over the world. And I think this will be very useful, because since we see that there is not so much knowledge in Europe, but this can be very useful then to demonstrate the value and the need to really look into these forests and what's happening to them. And then we'll try, and this is not going to be tackled during this workshop, but we are still trying to really get a final step where we integrate this knowledge, and we'll discuss drivers of change, and through this adaptive management, as already mentioned. Okay, so about the expert consultations, we are going to discuss the results from the questionnaire and also from our initial literature survey. And we also want to agree on a working group for doing a review on trends. And then for the systematic review, we already have a draft protocol that we are just discussing with Andrew for the 2nd time. So we already worked with this a little bit, but we are going now to present this to the experts and to discuss with them different aspects and what they think. And also to see who is willing to continue to help us with this. And we are not going to do anything with that in the workshop. So thank you for all your attention. And again, if you're interested, although even if you're not expert on kelps.